The night a country woke up different than it fell asleep. Nothing exploded. No borders moved overnight. Yet by morning, the country was no longer the same. This story matters today because some of the most powerful national transformations do not arrive through war or revolution, but through decisions made quietly, often justified as temporary, necessary, or harmless. The changes that reshape nations most permanently are frequently the ones that arrive without opposition, slipping past public awareness in moments of fatigue, distraction, or misplaced trust. On that night, leaders gathered under pressure, facing a situation they believed could no longer be delayed. Economic strain, political deadlock, and growing unrest had narrowed their options, turning urgency into justification. The convergence of crises created an atmosphere in which extraordinary measures felt not only acceptable but inevitable, and the absence of alternatives silenced the doubts that might otherwise have slowed the process. The decision was framed as protection, a short-term measure meant to restore order and prevent greater instability. Few were told the full scope, and fewer still were invited to question it. While most citizens slept, laws were passed, powers expanded, and safeguards adjusted in ways that would permanently alter how the country functioned. By the time the public learned what had happened, the mechanisms were already in motion. The speed of implementation was itself a strategy, because presenting changes as accomplished facts made them far harder to challenge than proposals still open for debate. Morning arrived without chaos. People went to work, markets opened, and daily routines continued, masking how much had changed beneath the surface. The absence of visible disruption was itself the most effective disguise, because people judge the significance of events by their immediate impact, and when the immediate impact is invisible, the event itself seems insignificant. But the balance between authority and freedom had shifted. Rights that once felt permanent were now conditional, and oversight that once restrained power had weakened. The architecture of accountability that had taken generations to construct had been altered in hours, and the full meaning of that alteration would only become clear through years of accumulated consequence. The country had not fallen. It had transformed quietly in the space between night and dawn, and reversing that shift would prove far harder than making it. In the days that followed, the changes were explained as technical adjustments rather than fundamental shifts, emphasizing stability while downplaying permanence. Officials reassured the public that safeguards remained intact, even as oversight mechanisms were narrowed and authority consolidated. The language used was deliberately calm and procedural, designed to frame the changes as administrative rather than political, reducing the likelihood that citizens would recognize the full extent of what had occurred. Most citizens adapted quickly, not out of approval, but because disruption felt costly and resistance uncertain. The calculation was simple and deeply human. Challenging the changes carried visible risk, while accepting them carried only invisible cost. And in moments of uncertainty, most people choose a path that feels safer in the short term. Institutions recalibrated their roles, adjusting to new limits and expectations without open confrontation. Courts interpreted the changes within existing legal frameworks. Bureaucracies incorporated new procedures. And media outlets adjusted their coverage to reflect the new boundaries of acceptable discussion. Public debate softened as uncertainty replaced confidence, making silence feel safer than challenge. What made the transformation effective was its subtlety, because nothing dramatic forced immediate opposition. There was no moment of obvious tyranny, no clear line that had been crossed, and no single action that could serve as a rallying point for resistance. The changes were distributed across dozens of measures, each one small enough to be dismissed and large enough to matter collectively. Life continued, but with less transparency, fewer checks, and a growing reliance on trust in those holding power. The system was not dismantled, it was reshaped, becoming harder to recognize in its new form. The country was adjusting to a new normal before fully understanding what had been lost. And once normalization began, reversal became increasingly difficult. Each day that passed without challenge made the changes appear more legitimate, as precedent accumulated and institutional memory adapted. The new arrangements stopped feeling new. They became simply the way things were, and challenging them required explaining not just why they were wrong, but why they had ever been different. The conflict emerged as the long-term effects of that night became impossible to ignore, revealing how temporary measures had quietly redefined the limits of authority. What had been presented as emergency powers for a specific crisis were now being applied routinely. What had been justified as temporary had become permanent through simple continuation. Policies expanded beyond their original scope, justified by efficiency, security, and the precedent already established. Powers that had been granted for a specific crisis were applied to situations they were never intended to address, and each extension was defended by pointing to previous one, creating a chain of justification that stretched further from the original purpose with every link. The logic was circular but effective. The power existed, therefore it could be used, and each use justified the next. Challenges to power were met with procedure rather than force, making resistance appear illegitimate rather than dangerous. Citizens who objected were not silenced violently. They were overwhelmed by process, buried in legal complexity, and exhausted by systems designed to delay rather than resolve. The effect was the same as direct suppression, but with the appearance of fairness and legality, making it far harder to oppose. Trust eroded as citizens realized that consent had been assumed rather than granted, turning stability into compliance. The relationship between government and citizen had fundamentally changed. Where once authority derived from consent, it now derived from precedent and procedure. The government no longer asked permission. It announced decisions and justified them after the fact. The buildup intensified when external crises tested the system, showing how much discretion now rested in fewer hands. Decisions that once required consultation, debate, and approval were now made swiftly and unilaterally, justified by the very emergency powers that the night's changes had established. The concentration of authority that had seemed necessary during crisis now appeared permanent, regardless of whether crisis continued. What once required debate now required permission, and what once demanded justification now relied on necessity. The transformation had succeeded not through coercion, but through acceptance shaped by fatigue and fear. The country had not been conquered. It had been redesigned while its citizens looked away. And by the time they looked back, the redesign was complete. The architecture had changed, but the facade remained familiar, and that familiarity prevented recognition of how different the structure had become. The country faced a reality that the night's decision had not solved crisis, but redefined normal. This was the moment when quiet change revealed its full weight, and the cost of that night could no longer be ignored. The climax arrived when the country finally recognized that nothing had truly returned to normal, because the balance that once limited power had never been restored. What was framed as temporary had become permanent through routine and acceptance. The emergency powers remained in force long after the emergency had passed, justified now not by crisis but by convenience and institutional inertia. The resolution lies in understanding that the most lasting transformations are often the quietest ones, carried forward not by force, but by habit. When change arrives without resistance, it embeds itself deeper than any dramatic upheaval. The absence of opposition does not mean the presence of consent, and the stability that follows quiet transformation is not the same as the stability that precedes it. What looks like peace may simply be the exhaustion of resistance. This story matters today because emergency decisions still shape modern societies, often justified by urgency, while altering foundations in ways that are difficult to reverse. The pattern recurs because the conditions that produce it recur: crisis, exhaustion, and the willingness to trade oversight for the promise of immediate relief. History shows that what happens in moments of fear often defines what follows in calm. The choices made when people are most vulnerable become the structures that govern them when they regain strength, and by then those structures have become too embedded to easily change. The night this country woke up different is not unique. It is a pattern repeated whenever vigilance fades and trust replaces accountability. Every generation faces its own version of this night, justified by its own specific crisis, defended by its own specific rhetoric, and normalized by its own specific exhaustion. Once a nation changes in silence, recovering balance requires more than awareness. It requires collective will, and collective will is hardest to summon when the change has already become comfortable. So what do you think? Would you have noticed the moment everything changed?